guys, and I hope my talk is not very boring, that you can enjoy your lunch also. Okay, my work is information consumption on social media along three dimensions of efficiency, trust, and divisiveness, but today I'm going to focus on the second and third one, if I have time. So, as you all know, news has been very important medium to communicate the information. And traditionally, they produced and edited by professional journalists. And there were just a handful of them. So it was easy for watchdog groups to check the accuracy and biases of the news. But when news consumption moved to social media, everyone can produce, edit, and share the news. The benefits are there are a huge number of news sources, and the news can propagate faster. But the problem here is that there is no accountability for the accuracy of the presented information. And the after effect of this is proliferation of fake news. And by fake news, I mean the news which is intentionally and verifiably is false. So the focus of this talk is going to address the fake news and how the possible ways of mitigating them. So there has been few approach to detect the fake news. And one way is to ask experts to fact check the news stories. They just follow some principal rules and then they fact check the news. But the problem here is that users just can fact check the limited number of news. So it's not scalable. So to address this problem, one ideal way is to prioritize the stories and ask the expert to fact check the top ranked news stories, okay? And, but the question is that which kind of news should prioritize for fact checking? The current strategy that deployed by social media such as Facebook and Twitter is they ask their users to report the stories which they perceive to be false. And then the stories that reported by many users is prioritized for fact checking. But the question raises that, is this the best strategy? And the goal here, the objective here is the fact check the false news with higher probability than true stories, okay? And then we should ask, does the strategy that this social media deployed achieve this objective or not, okay? And to answer this question, we need to see how users perceive the truthiness of the different stories, because they rely on users' perception. Let's consider some example, and then I'm going also to say the ground truth value of each story that labeled by fact checkers in Snopes. For example, for this story, President Trump inherited the White House infested with cockroaches due to the careless of President Obama. How many of you think this is false? Many of you. Okay, and then this story is maybe it's a little difficult because you need to be in US. But Senator John McCain voted against the healthcare proposal issues. Again, how many of you think this is false? None of you, or it's a little difficult? Okay, let's go to the third one. The national debt saw a surprising decline of $100 billion between 20th January and 27th of July. How many of you think this is false? Some of you, and yeah, okay. And then this, as all of you, yeah, most of you, perceive this false, and this is true. And then just consider this as the fourth example. This is the mostly false. And then we wanted to see how social media users perceive the truthiness of their stories, okay? To do that, we actually developed a novel approach to, to gather this perception on amateur mechanical tours. We set up a survey and asked AMT users to rapidly, within the 10 seconds, assess the truthiness of their stories, okay? And then, just let's see this for example. We say, here, this is the ground truth level that's labeled by fact checker in Snopes, okay? And y-axis show the perceived truth level that we compute by averaging truth perception by 100 AMT users. And then, for example, this story is one, that cockroach one. this is false. The ground truth value is false. And many of people, they perceive it as false, as you. And then this story is false, but many people, they perceive it as true. And then for S3, this is the true story, but some people perceive as true, and some people perceive as false. Okay. And then, based on the current strategy that deployed by, as I said, by Facebook and Twitter, the order would be in this way. S1, because most of the people, they report this story as false. And then S4, because many. And then S3, some people. And then S2, because a few number of people, they report as false. Okay? But the desired ranking would be this. S1 and S2, because both of them are false. And then S4, and then finally S3. Okay? So this means that this strategy, this current strategy, doesn't achieve the objectives. Yes? If you have, don't hesitate to ask questions if you have any question to have clear. So, and this happened because there's systematic bias in users' perception. And the first one is there is stories, and users are gullible to that. This is false story, but users perceive it as true. And then these kind of stories that the users are more gullible to that, they have less probability for fact-checking because they have less chance to report, okay? And then the second thing is the story that is true, or users they are cynical to that. They don't believe on that story. It's true, but they think it's not believable. Okay, and then even in the social media, if they fact-check the stories and they found this is true, they don't label on the social media. So the limitation of the counter strategy is the system bias. There are systematic biases in users' truth perception, as I said, gullibility and cynicality. And the counter strategy, they rely on users' perception, okay? And this doesn't achieve the objective, the goal. And the objective is that fact-check the false news with higher probability than true news. But is it the only objective we have? We introduced two other objectives. That the first one is correct the misperception of users, fact-check the stories where users' perceived truth level differ a lot from ground truth level. For example, for stories 2 that was false and many users, they perceive it as true, okay? And then we are thinking this kind of news are more harmful compared to the first one because it's false and many believe that. Or vice versa, even for true stories. This is true, but no one believes on that, okay? Maybe it's good to believe. And then the second one is decrease the disagreement among the users. You know, this kind of news I will talk about in detail later, but just give us some intuition. There are some news, and people, there is a disagreement among the users. And this kind of news may increase polarization in society, okay? And then we observe that these three objectives, they are incompatible. As you see, the order is different. And then in a bigger data set, we observe that there's no correlation between them, and there's no overlap among the top-ranked user stories in the bigger data set. So it's impossible to achieve this objective simultaneously when prioritizing the stories, okay? We need to select one of them and then rank them. So as a summary, we give the news to the users and ask them to assess them rapidly within the 10 seconds, and then we select one of these objectives and rank them and give to the fact checker to fact check the news stories, okay? But then maybe you are going to ask, how do you automate this to ranking them? I'm not going to detail, but very briefly I said that for the third one, we just need the judgment and assessment of the user. It's enough for us. But for the first and second objective, we need the ground truth value of the news. But it's not easy to have that. Then we use users' demographic features as a gender, education, political leaning, who judge the news. And then we use some simple supervised learning to predict the false and trueness of the news stories, and also high and low total perception bias. And then we observe that our our approach can predict with a good accuracy. Okay, and then let's go to the second project, but I'm going at first to give some intuition. There are some news that, regardless of their ground truth value, the perception of users is different based on their leaning. For example, for this news, this is the distribution of the judgment of Republican, and this is for Democrats. Okay, and as you see, for this news, Democrats like this and they perceive it as true, but Republicans, they don't like this and they perceive it as false. Okay, and we have another example. That is the vice versa. Democrats, they don't like this, but Republicans like this news. And this kind of news may, as I said, increase this polarization in the network, in the society. Okay. And then, so let's go to the second work that we have done, and you know, this is all of us, most of the people, we rely on social media to get our information and news. And there are a variety of news that in the social media that they, in which they span the whole spectrum of political ideologies. Yes, and then. Even though there are lots of news sources, a variety of news sources, but users, they limit themselves to the kind of news that reinforce their pre-existing view. So blue users, they select the blue news, and red users select red news. Yes, and by blue, I mean Democrat, and red, I mean Republican leaning. Okay, and then by this selective exposure, they just read the news from their side, and these kind of things may lead to more politically fragmented and less cohesive society. And even this fragmentation is further amplified by social media platforms, which they recognize the user's preferences. So they recommend blue news to blue users and red news to red users. And this again may lead, more polarization in society. And then there are several approaches, the systems that they try to address this polarization by promoting diversity, by deliberately exposing the red news to blue users and vice versa, or show both of them to both groups. Okay, this is a good. This seems that it's a good idea, but in real world, users, they may reject or ignore the disagreeable perspective, and because confronting users with some radical news, extreme news, may lead them to even hate the other parties. So we, in this work, we propose a complementary approach which identify and highlight news that are likely to evoke the similar reaction of the readers, regardless of their leaning. And we define this purple news, which those have high consensus value. That means that they have the same reaction from their readers, regardless of their political leaning. And hope this kind of news, if we recommend to users, reduce the polarization in society. So let me very briefly say how we can operationalize the consensus value for the news. Okay, as I said, the news with high consensus should have the general agreement in their readers. Okay, and then so for a given news, we measure the reaction of Democrat and Republican, And then we compute the consensus in this way. The disagreement of shows the number of Democrats who disagree with the content of the news, and shows the number of Republicans who disagree with the content of the news. And then this is the total number of Democrats and Republicans we have, okay? And then we compute the reaction of Democrat and Republican by set up a survey in Amazon Mechanical Turk, and then we ask them for their reaction by selecting one of 3 options of agreement, neutral, and disagreement with the content of the news, okay? And then we formed our ground truth data set in this way. Okay, we just show the number of news to users, and also at the end of the survey, we ask the users to give us their political leaning. So here I just show the 3 news that the content just say Comey just fired by President Trump. And as you see, these 2 news, all of them have the same news, but these 2 is more extreme. But this one just said that this guy is fired by President Trump. And the reaction for this news is same for their readers.
So, sorry, I mean, those are high consensus news.
This is the high consensus, but this is the low. Because it's a little, here is a little, it's skewed to Democrat, and this is skewed to Republican. But this one just said this happened, and there's no different reaction by the readers. So, okay, let me just very briefly say how we automated this. Based on the prior work on classification and prediction tasks, they mostly use the 2 broad type of features. I mean, publisher features and content-based features. Okay, but in this work we propose a novel class of audience-leaning based features. Let me give an intuition about that. Here, this is the x-axis just show the political leaning that varies from -1 that is indicating Republican and goes to 1 that indicating the Democrat, yes? And then we show the distribution of political leaning of these 3 group of audience, retweeters, repliers, and followers. And we observe for this high consensus news, these 3 distributions are very same. And then for this low consensus post, there's a difference between these 3 distributions. Okay, and so we see this pattern that, and this I think makes sense, that retweeters and followers, they are mostly supporters of the tweets. They like that tweet, they agree with that tweet, yes? And repliers are mostly the guys who opposing that tweet, they debate that kind of tweet, so they are against. And then, based on this observation, we add this feature that if these 2 distributions, they are same, then we have a high consensus post. And if there's difference between them, then we have low consensus post. And then we observe that our approach using these audience-leaning based features outperform the previous works. Okay, I'm just going to show that this is our prediction, not very high, but at least better than the previous works. And then if you are interested, we can discuss it later. And then, yeah, just let's finish here. Thank you.